I encourage you to open your Bibles this morning to Genesis chapter 39. We've been exploring what God has to say to us in the Old Testament. If you're not familiar with the Bible, the Old Testament's on the left side, the New Testament's on the right side. We've been on the left side. The very beginning, the first book of the Bible, the book of Genesis. We're in chapter 39 this week. And I hope you've been able to see the glorious story of redemption that God has for His people, that it doesn't take long to see and then begins to grow as you read the story, see how it blooms in all its glory. We're seeing it blooming more in chapter 39 of Genesis this morning. This is the Word of God speaking directly to us. Praise the Lord. Now Joseph had been brought down to Egypt, and Potiphar, an officer of Pharaoh, the captain of the guard, an Egyptian, had bought him from the Ishmaelites who had brought him down there. The Lord was with Joseph, and he became a successful man. And he was in the house of his Egyptian master. His master saw that the Lord was with him, and that the Lord caused all that he did to succeed in his hands. So Joseph found favor in his sight and attended him, and he made him overseer of his house and put him in charge of all that he had. From the time that he made him overseer in his house and over all that he had, the Lord blessed the Egyptian's house for Joseph's sake. The blessing of the Lord was on all that he had in house and field. So he left all that he had in Joseph's charge, and because of him, he had no concern about anything but the food he ate. Now Joseph was handsome in form and appearance, and after a time his master's wife cast her eyes on Joseph and said, "Lie with me." But he refused and said to his master's wife, "Behold, because of me my master has no concern about anything in the house, and he has put everything that he has in my charge. He is not greater in this house than I am, nor has he kept back anything from me except you, because you are his wife. How then can I do this great wickedness and sin against God?" And as she spoke to Joseph day after day, he would not listen to her, to lie beside her, or to be with her. But one day, when he went into the house to do his work, and none of the men of the house was there in the house, she caught him by his garment, saying, "Lie with me." But he left his garment in her hand and fled and got out of the house. And as soon as she saw that he had left his garment in her hand and had fled out of the house, she called to the men of her household and said to them, "See, he has brought among us a Hebrew to laugh at us. He came in to me to lie with me, and I cried out with a loud voice. And as soon as he heard that I lifted up my voice and cried out, he left his garment beside me and fled and got out of the house." Then she laid up his garment by her until his master came home. And she told him the same story, saying, "The Hebrew servant whom you have brought among us came in to me to laugh at me. But as soon as I lifted up my voice and cried, he left his garment beside me and fled out of the house." As soon as his master heard the words that his wife spoke to him, "This is the way your servant treated me," his anger was kindled, and Joseph's master took him and put him into the prison, the place where the king's prisoners were confined, and he was there in prison. But the Lord was with Joseph and showed him steadfast love and gave him favor in the sight of the keeper of the prison. And the keeper of the prison put Joseph in charge of all the prisoners who were in the prison. Whatever was done there, he was the one who did it. The keeper of the prison paid no attention to anything that was in Joseph's charge, because the Lord was with him. Whatever he did, the Lord made it succeed. Let's pray together. Holy Spirit, speak to us now. Help us to see what true blessing is, to know we're blessed by you, see things succeed, even when we're going through trial, because of what you are doing. Pray this in your name. Amen. Why is it that when we're having a good day, nothing's broken in our house, Nothing's breaking in our car. Our children are eating all their food. We receive notes of encouragement. It's those days when the sun is shining, when the birds are singing, that we say, we're blessed. Hashtag blessed. But when the sun's not shining, things aren't going so good. Things are breaking down. The person that we thought liked us, we discovered doesn't like us as much as we thought. Our children aren't eating their vegetables. They're only eating candy. Then we say we're not blessed. Why is that? Do we have the right kind of understanding about blessing that God has? People often think of God's blessing sort of as like a good luck charm. It's like a lucky rabbit's foot. You just keep it in your pocket before you make a big decision, or before you've got, this issue that's really difficult to deal with come up, and before you go maybe to work or whatever it is, you reach your hand in your pocket and you sort of rub it. You give it a little squeeze, just for good luck, just for good measure, to see if all goes well. And hopefully all does go well. And if it does go well, you remind yourself, God bless me. God's real. But if it doesn't, you just say, oh, well, I tried, and move on. This passage this morning is a passage that takes that idea and just destroys it when it comes to understanding what it means to actually be blessed by God. Because we see in this passage the story of Joseph. We're seeing some characteristics, aren't we, of Joseph, of what it means to reveal to us something that's already true of us if we have a relationship with God. And it's that no matter what, whether times are good, whether times are bad, God loves you. His steadfast love is with you, like it is with Joseph. If you are holding fast to his covenantal love, which he's offered us in Christ, hasn't he? If you're a believer in Jesus, you believe he died for you and he rose from the dead, and your sins are forgiven, then you've been changed. If you really believe, you have a change of heart on the inside. It's called being born again, and that shows you that you have this relationship with God where you receive God's favor. You don't receive his judgment anymore, no matter what. Only love. And so if we're holding to that, we see some characteristics here of what it means to be reconciled to that hope that you have, to be saved from your sin. And right off the bat, I really do want us to see that. There are three characteristics we're going to jump into. But I want us to see two bookends that are just unmistakable about this idea that no matter what, whether times are good or whether times are bad, you can be blessed by God. Look at verses 1 through 3. Now Joseph had been brought down to Egypt, and Potiphar, an officer of Pharaoh, the captain of the guard, an Egyptian, had bought him from the Ishmaelites who had brought him down there. So right off the bat, you've got the captain of the guard who's going to take him into his house. And it says in verse 3, his master saw that the Lord was with him and that the Lord had caused all that he did to succeed in his hands. So it starts off pretty good, in a pretty nice place. He's already been sold as a slave, which was bad. And he's already got his brothers plotting to kill him, which is bad. So how much worse can it get? Well, he starts off pretty good in the master's house. But if you go down to verse 20, you see the digression, don't you? Because in verse 20 it says, and Joseph's master, so here's the other bookend, took him and put him into the prison, the place where the king's prisoners were confined. And he was in the prison. So now he goes from the master's house to the master's dungeon. And it says what in verse 21? But the Lord was with Joseph and showed him steadfast love and gave him favor in the sight of the keeper of the prison. He goes from eating dinner with the captain to now eating dinner with the bottom rung of the prison guards. That's Joseph. And yet, God still blesses him. God is still faithful to cause him to succeed. And he does the same thing in our lives, whether times are good, whether times are bad, whether we make a foolish decision or a wise decision, whether there are circumstances that are outside of our control to hurt us or help us. God is still with us. God is still blessing us in some way, shape, or form. And so the characteristics of the kind of person we're becoming inside this idea that whether things are good or bad, God is blessing us with his steadfast love are these. Here's the first one. Being a good steward. These are your bulletin. Being a good steward is a characteristic of someone who has been blessed by God and they're succeeding, whether good or bad. Being a good steward. Number 2, fighting sin. Number 3, persevering through trial. Being a good steward, fighting sin, persevering through trial. If you want to know whether or not you're loved by God and receive favor from Him, regardless of circumstance, these characteristics, not perfectly, but will be revealing themselves in your life. Notice I'm not saying we do these and then we're blessed, right? It's not like we do these things and then we earn God's favor. These are signs we've already received God's favor through a covenantal blessing of His steadfast love in the gospel. Is that we are being a good steward, we're fighting sin, and we're persevering through trials. So let's see these in the text. Let's apply them to us. So the first one is being a good steward. We see this at the beginning, verses 1 through 5. I've already read verse 1. Let's start in verse 2. The Lord was with Joseph, and he became a successful man, and he was in the house of his Egyptian master. His master saw that the Lord was with him, and that the Lord caused all that he did to succeed in his hands. So Joseph found favor in his sight and attended him, and he made him an overseer of his house and put him in charge of all that he had. From the time that he had made him overseer in his house and over all that he had, the Lord blessed the Egyptian's house for Joseph's sake. The blessing of the Lord was on all that he had in the house and in the field. So I hope throughout this passage you can see that there's a balance between God's sovereignty and human responsibility. There's a harmonious mystery to that dance between the two, isn't there? Where God is sovereign to do all these things, but yet man has a responsibility to respond to God's favor. Man, you have to do something, right? Joseph is doing something because there has to be a way of measuring the success that God is ordaining through Joseph. Everything we have has been given to us by God. If you're a Christian and you're a believer in Jesus, God has put things into our charge so that we are stewards of them. The question is, are we becoming a good steward of those things or a bad steward? Whether we're becoming a good steward or a bad steward says something about what we're believing about God's sovereign will in our lives and whether or not we're going to submit to it or not. If we want to be a good steward of what God has given us in our lives to persevere through trial, whether circumstances are good or bad, we need to be showing the world that we're submitting to a greater authority than our own. We just don't take our stuff and do with it whatever we want to do with it. We take our stuff, and we take our time, and we take our family, and we take all of these things that God's put us a steward of, and we submit it to the Lord's authority. It reveals a faith, doesn't it? There's a fear of the Lord in being a good steward. You know one of the greatest enemies to being a good steward is? Envy. Envy. It's a horrible enemy to being a good steward because what happens is we start envying another family. And what that does is it robs us of contentment. It robs us of joy with our own family. And before you know it, it's like a snuff on a candle. Remember those old snuffs when you went to your grandma's house and you lit that candle for Thanksgiving and she always would let you snuff it out at the end when you were done with the meal? No? I did that. I always look forward to that. You know what I'm talking about. That's what envy is. It's snuffing out the light of joy that you need to be a good steward of your family that God has given you. You start envying other people's time. You start envying their money. You start envying their job and their possessions. And it's snuffing out this flame of stewardship that God is trying to ignite in our lives. You can start envying other churches. You want to snuff out ministry in the local church really quickly? Start envying, other churches. And before you know it, you lose perspective of what God is doing in your congregation with the people you know and the possibilities that were there by being a good steward of those ministries. You start envying what other people have. And what it does, it becomes a sign that we're probably not believing the right things we should be believing about God. Have you thought about that? When you start envying something that doesn't belong to you, you can be tempted to believe maybe God doesn't want to bless you. You start believing things like maybe God's not good to you by giving you what He has. You start believing these lies. And before you know it, you might start questioning your faith altogether, right? And that especially happens whenever we're faced with a trial, circumstances outside of our control. So to cultivate faithfulness, to cultivate our understanding that God blesses us no matter what, we're content, aren't we? Think for a moment in this passage about all the things Joseph could be envying about this situation. So he's been put in a place where he owns nothing. And he's in charge of things in the house and in the field. Everything that his master has been put in his charge. What can he be envying about these things? But instead of doing that, there's something about his faith, isn't there? That there's something about understanding the steadfast love of God that makes him a good steward of these things, rather than being envious and hoarding them and being discontent and playing the victim card. He doesn't. He plays the card of the servant to his master, to serve his master well. There might be situations in our lives, and we've all been there, I think, and we'll probably be there again, where we don't get to choose whom we serve, like Joseph. Or we don't get to choose what we're serving, or where we're serving. What are we going to do in those moments? I think what helps us cultivate being a good steward is recognizing that those responsibilities have been given to us by God. And we're there to serve Him in all that He's trying to accomplish in and through where He's called us to serve and whom He's called us to serve. Because at the end of the day, we're showing the world that the strength to serve, it doesn't come from our preferences, does it? It doesn't come from circumstances being what they should be. We're not letting people dictate who we are and what we're called to do. We let God. So we're showing the world that our strength comes from Him to serve. It doesn't come from our feelings, whether we feel like serving or not. You know, whenever I talk with people about their giftedness in the church and their talents and where they want to serve, they start saying, well, I feel like doing this and I feel like doing that. I want to say, what if you don't feel like that? But yet we still need you to do this. What shall we do? There's an objective authority from God, isn't there, calling us to be good stewards of whatever it is that He wants us to accomplish. And what's going to fuel the contentment, right? That's what we want. We want contentment fueled. And we want the gas tank of anxiety to just be empty, right? I mean, we don't want to feel any more anxiety from the decisions we make or envy or anything like that. So what's going to fuel the contentment is going to be the perspective of being a good steward and not letting the circumstance or people dictate how we steward. So what's the best example of this? I think one of the best examples of how to do this well is parenting, right? Parenting. I mean, I make my kids a delicious peanut butter and jelly sandwich, right? And it's with peanut butter, because that's the best peanut butter to make a peanut butter jelly sandwich. And whenever I bake all of these sandwiches for the kids at 6 in the morning, or my wife does, we both do it, we take turns, they say, I don't want a peanut butter and jelly sandwich. What do I do in that moment? Am I going to be a good steward? Or am I going to allow them to dictate then what I do next? Right? Or whenever we're trying to give them chores, when we give our kids chores, we design them specifically to only take 5 minutes, right? I mean, because we know that if it's any longer than that, we're already going to have problems. And so this is only a 5-minute chore. And yet, they don't want to do it. Their attitude is bleeding into the situation, trying to do what? Manipulate what's going on. What are we going to do in that moment? We're going to be a good steward because there's something else, there's a higher authority that's calling us to do that. And then what about when we make mistakes as parents? Boy, howdy. Just makes everything more messy, doesn't it? Because we get mad unnecessarily about something that's going on, and it sort of muddies these waters and creates a new issue that now we have to deal with. What are we going to do in that moment when we've messed up as a parent? There's lots of things in the circumstances and problems of life that try to manipulate whether or not we're going to be the kind of steward that God is calling us to be. And they say something about our faith. They say something about what we're believing in those moments and who we're going to be submitting to and by what authority we do what we do. And if we're believing the right things, though, about God, He's already favored us. He already loves us. We have all that we need in Christ. He truly is our all in all. Then we've already been blessed by Him. Right? We already have the joy we need to step into those moments and be a good steward to provide for our children in this case. Whether they think they know what they need or not, we can provide for them what we know the Lord wants them to have in those moments. And the same is true if we're an employee. The same is true if we're a boss. The same is true for pastors. It's so easy for pastors to start envying other situations of other pastors and envying and thinking about how people are manipulating situations by believing things that aren't right. And before you know it, you get stuck in a place where you're not guided anymore by anything. I mean, what do you do in those moments? You've got to be a good steward because you're fearing the Lord rather than man. The same is true of all of us, parents. Wherever we find ourselves, whether you're single, whether you're married, who are you going to help make you successful? It's the Lord who gives success. It's not ourselves. It's not the environment around us. You go to any bookstore and you see these self-help sections. That's what they're called. Or like self-esteem, maybe. The self-help and self-esteem sections. They say the greatest asset to helping you be successful in life is you. That's not what we see in this passage. We see that it's the Lord who causes us to be successful if we're trusting in His covenantal love. Because He takes those things that we're called to be stewards of and we use them for His kingdom's purposes. Do you remember Jesus? Remember in Matthew 14 where He's talking about the talents? By talents there He's referring to money. He's got 3 servants. The first servant He gives 5 talents. The second servant He gives 2 talents. And the last servant He gives 1 talent. And He goes away for a time. And so what do they do with those talents? Well, the first 2 invest them and then multiply the talents. Who knows what kind of problems went into those investments? I'm sure it just wasn't easy cheesy, right? But they did what they needed to do to multiply the investment. But the last servant took it and buried it in the ground. And Jesus says the master came back. You know what He did with that third servant? He threw him out into the darkness and called him wicked. Let's not be the third servant. Let's be good stewards of God and what God has invested. He's invested so much, hasn't He, with the gospel? It's so precious. He's invested this into our lives so that by faith we can multiply the things that He's entrusted to us for His kingdom's purposes. That's the goal in life. You know, if you're a college student, you're getting ready to embark on a career, whatever that career is, how are you going to make a name for Jesus, not yourself? How are you going to take the investment He's put into your life and expand His kingdom, not your own? So we start doing our own kingdoms, we're going to get disappointed really, really quickly. But with Christ and submission to Him, we become those kinds of good stewards. So that's the first characteristic of receiving success from the Lord. It's becoming a good steward. And you realize that God is blessing your life through that stewardship. Second one, fighting sin. Look at verses 6 through 10. It says, so he left all that he had in Joseph's charge. Because of him, he had no concern about anything but the food he ate. Now Joseph was handsome in form and appearance. And after a time, his master's wife cast her eyes on Joseph and said, lie with me. But he refused and said to his master's wife, behold, because of me, my master has no concern about anything in the house, and he has put everything that he has in my charge. He is not greater in this house than I am. Nor has he kept back anything from me except you, because you are his wife. How then can I do this great wickedness and sin against God? And then later, of course, he's holding on to his garment and he flees. He's physically running out to get away from the situation. There are 2 primary ways we can fight sin if we recognize we've been blessed by God in the gospel. The first way is by fearing God. He recognizes that he's just not going to sin against his master or against her or against himself. He's going to be sinning against God. There's a fear of God that helps him fight sin. Why do we not gossip about others? Is it rude? Yes, it's rude. Is it inaccurate? Yes, it's inaccurate. Is it because that it's annoying? Yes. Is it unloving? Yes. All those things are true. But the most basic, fundamental reason is because we have a healthy respect and reverence for God, right? Well, how does that all fit in? God has created this person in His image. They have dignity, worth, and value simply by being created by God. God has a plan for them. We are not God. You want to know why we don't gossip about each other? It's because we recognize that life is full of nuance, and God holds all the nuances of life in the palm of His hand. He knows all of them deeply and intimately, and He makes perfect judgments, and we don't. Our judgments are flawed. They're imperfect. We don't gossip because we know that God is in control. And in the end, He will judge all things perfectly, according to His will. So fighting that sin of gossip, it should flow from a fear of the Lord. Just like all fighting sin should. Whatever sin you're fighting, and I hope you're fighting, The devil and the forces of darkness, even our own sin, is constantly working against us. And God has given us a spirit of boldness and truth to fight against those sins. And we do that by fearing the Lord. Whether it's lust of the flesh, passions of ungodliness, you have idols in your life, you can turn a good thing and make it into an idol. Your marriage, make it into an idol. Your money, idol. All good things. Sex, idol. People's opinions, idol. We turn things all the time and we flip them around into idols. We should fight against doing that with the fear of the Lord. That's the first way. But the second way that we can fight sin is by loving our neighbor, which Joseph does too, doesn't he? Because he actually has a concern in verse 8 about the master, doesn't he? When he's talking about the master, but he refused and said to his master's wife, "Behold, because of me, my master has no concern about anything in the house." And that's good, isn't it? I mean, he's thinking about all that he's doing for his master, so his master doesn't have to be concerned about him and what he's going to do. There's a love there that he has for his neighbor. The nature of sin in our lives, part of it, is to destroy our relationships with other people. Whether it's a little thing like being rude and interrupting someone, or whether it's a big thing like making a very hurtful, intentional decision, there is a violence that sin wields against one another. And if I'm loving my neighbor, what I will do is I will seek to avoid that. So that takes an intentionality. It's not just passively thinking, well, I'm a pretty good person and everything's going to be fine. No, there's an intentionality to actually fighting sin by being intentional to love my neighbor and do them good. Whether my neighbor is sitting in a committee meeting at the church, or whether my neighbor is literally next door to me at my house, or whether my neighbor's at the post office, there's an intentionality, isn't there, to fight sin by being intentional to love our neighbors and do them good. That's why we need to be quick to confess our sins. Because the nature of sin is to hurt the relationship. But if we're quick to confess our pride, or our jealousy, or bad attitudes that we've been having, or whatever it is, God uses that, doesn't he? He uses it with a truth and a grace there to mend relationships. That's what he's doing. And a little goes a long way. When people think about loving others, I think they think about it like breathing, right? I mean, anyone can do it. Everyone does. We sort of just, assume it. We don't really think about it. It's just what we do. But Scripture's version of love is more like breathing while swimming. It's a little different. I mean, certainly everyone might have the capacity to do it. Doesn't mean everyone does, because it takes an intentionality. You're going to have to be thoughtful about it. A little bit, too, goes a long way. You need to be paying attention to how we're making our way through the waters of life by being intentional to love our neighbor. Just do this. This is a helpful way to gauge whether or not we're doing this well. The next time you're tempted to sin against another person, whether by thought, or by word, or by attitude, believing things that aren't true, or not giving them the benefit of the doubt, let me ask you this. Pay attention to how you're loving them. Really pay attention to it. The next time you're tempted, ask yourself, how can I do them good? How can I love them? And you know what you might do? You might just take a really nasty situation into the biggest blessing you maybe experienced. I don't know what God might do, but he can change circumstances if we're paying attention to fight sin by loving our neighbor. So it's a fear of God and it's a love for neighbor that's motivating us to realize we've already been blessed by the Lord, who's causing us to succeed, to fight sin. What's the third characteristic? The third characteristic of being blessed by God is persevering through trials. We see this in verse 19 through 23. So he says this: "As soon as his master heard the words that his wife spoke to him, 'This is the way your servant treated me,' his anger was kindled. And Joseph's master took him and put him into the prison, the place where the king's prisoners were confined. And he was there in prison. But the Lord was with Joseph and showed him steadfast love and gave him favor in the sight of the keeper of the prison. And the keeper of the prison put Joseph in charge of all the prisoners who were in the prison. Whatever was done there, he was the one who did it. The keeper of the prison paid no attention to anything that was in Joseph's charge because the Lord was with him, and whatever he did, the Lord made him succeed. Man, incredible. So one of the things that I used to do that I'm just now starting to get back into a little bit is mountain biking. I used to mountain bike when I was in college. I got out of it for a while. I'm getting back into it, but I'm paying attention now because I got kids. I don't want to hurt myself, you know what I mean? And got insurance issues and stuff, and so whatever, you know, I mean, paying attention to that stuff. But one of the things that I was reminded of very quickly when you're mountain biking is things go from really high highs to really low lows like instantly. I mean, I can be flying down. That's what you want to do. You want to fly, Dale. You want to be flying, you know, down the hill, right? Just bouncing around, feeling the wind in your face, you know, through the trees, and then instantly, it's uphill. And it's a hill you can't go up. So you know what happens when a hill you can't go up? You usually fall. That's what happens. And it's like that. There's instant uphills, instant downhills, but there's something else that gets really annoying to all of that. So that's already kind of an issue you got to pay attention to. But the other two things that you have to be really mindful of when you're mountain biking, one is spiders. Because you go through about 1 million spider webs, and they're humongous when you go through them. And the other one is logs, just laying there, fallen trees. You got to pay attention to those too. You get damaged. And both of those things are a little different. Because when you go through a spider's web, you kind of just keep going, but it's like, oh, is there a spider on that? And you just kind of keep growing, and when you get home, you actually have spiders crawling on you. So that's like weird and irksome. But the tree is different because you got to get off. But whenever you get off and you got to move the tree, then the mosquitoes come. Because you're not moving. And then they're all over you. What are you going to do then? Sound like fun? Like I'm deterring all of you from ever getting on a mountain bike. But we know what that's like, don't we? Problems are different to all of us. They irk us in different ways. We all have different circumstances, whether we're on a high or on a low. And usually one problem leads to another problem. We all know what that's like. Just think of how big this trial was for Joseph. But yet, God is making him successful. Whether it's the smallest problem or the biggest trial in life, God is with us. Not to punish us, but to help us trust in him. To help us experience his purposes for our lives. And just think, one of the biggest problems I think that we all experience is when we're all accused unjustifiably of doing something wrong when we didn't. Because that's Joseph, isn't it? I mean, right here, a huge problem that he's facing is listening to this woman accuse him of something he didn't do. And he actually paid attention not to do by fleeing from her. And if you think it's not possible to flee while someone's holding on your garment, it is. I was actually in China on a mission trip. We were walking through the streets of Shanghai, and there was a police officer who had apprehended someone who had stolen something from a store, and he had the back of his collar on, the back of his jacket. And I kid you not, right in front of us, that dude just pulled himself out of his jacket and took off running. And the police officer didn't move. I thought, wow, that's real. That's crazy. Is his name Joseph? No. Definitely not. The dude was in trouble. That's Joseph. He's trying to intentionally not do this, and yet he's accused. What would you do in that situation? That's a huge problem. It's a very low, isn't it? He goes from dining, I just think about that, dining with the captain of the guard, to now dining with the bottom rung of all the prison guards. And life's full of nuance. It would be great if the master would have asked Joseph, tell me your side of the story. But he didn't. God knows what that's like. Because the most unjustifiable evil that's been done on planet Earth is the crucifixion of Jesus of Nazareth. He got accused of something he didn't do. And at the darkest hour of civilization, when God was crucified on the cross, the greatest love exploded from that moment. The greatest mercy. The most far-reaching redemption happened. So the next time you find yourself in a dark situation, it's a trial of loneliness or despair or a really hurtful sin where you've been accused of something you didn't do and your reputation's on the line. God is with you. God will help you succeed. God knows what that's like. He can sympathize with you, and He provides redemption for you with a persevering faith, doesn't He? That's what Joseph needed, was perseverance through trial, to know that God was in control. But what motivates that? Did you notice that in the passage? What motivates when you're in your darkest hour? What's going to motivate a perseverance through the trial? It's God's steadfast love, isn't it? It says, "And the steadfast love of God gave him favor in the sight of the keeper of the prison." That's so encouraging, isn't it? God's steadfast love is still with you. You don't have to search around for it. It's right there next to you. It's with you. You possess it. What a treasure. Anytime you feel like you've been robbed in life, because I bet Joseph felt that way. He felt like he'd been robbed of the life of his father. It was taken from him. He was robbed of his family. He might even feel like he's been robbed of the covenantal blessings. Even in his darkest hour, when he's in a pit, God's steadfast love is still with him. And it'll be with you and with me. That is our hope. That's where strength comes from. It's not whether or not we're loved by the people near us. It's not whether or not we love ourselves. That's all you hear on television. You know, the Ellen show, just like, love yourself more. The problem is you're not loving yourself more. The problem is you don't understand the steadfast love of God. God's love is steadfast. It holds you fast to Himself. You've been singing about it. That's the love of God in Christ. Powerful. This is why people need Jesus so bad. Because they see that love explicitly, clearly, in what Christ has done for them. They need that love. This is what our go-teams are all about. So if you want to know if you've been blessed by God and you're going to succeed, whether times are good or whether times are bad, know that God is working in you to make you a good steward, help you fight sin, and help you persevere through trials. Massive characteristics of someone who's trusting in the steadfast love of God. These are characteristics of what it means to be successful in the Lord's sight. How does our world define success? This week, as I was thinking through how to wrap this up, I was thinking through all the ways in which our world thinks people are successful. Power is a big one. If you're really powerful and you're really influential, you're successful. Money is a big one. The money's high, the customers are high, the clients are high, the numbers are high, the employees are high, and all of that's high, you're successful. You know? We think about it sometimes. Church is high, the numbers are high, we're successful. I'm not saying that's all bad. Doesn't necessarily mean you're unsuccessful, right? You have high numbers. But I think what would really be helpful, this passage shows us this, is instead of just thinking about the quantity of success, we think about the quality. The depth of what God is doing in a horrible situation. If you were to ask the world, is Joseph's situation from going from the captain of the guard to the prison a failure or success? What would they say? Failure. It's a setback. But God is doing something greater, isn't it? God is making him successful in ways that the world can't define. Because God is, and His love is producing a quality of a person. He cares not just about what we do, but the kind of person who's doing it. And that kind of person has a depth to them, where we're maturing and we are growing and we are becoming successful by what? Being a good steward, fighting sin, persevering through trial. Let's be successful in God's eyes, according to His steadfast love, not in the eyes of the world. I think this is why relationships in the church are so important. And intergenerational relationships. Because there are some folks who are a part of the older generation that know what it means to really persevere through trial. To know what it means to really continue trusting in the steadfast love of God. And the younger generation needs more of that. So we got to have these kinds of relationships where we're super intentional around a meal or around fellowships that we have at church, members meetings, and things like that. We're really paying attention to how we're helping one another. Be good stewards. Fight sin. Persevere through trial. We need each other. We've been talking about those kinds of things. Ask that question, how is God helping you fight sin? That's a great question to ask each other, to help disciple one another. And be honest. Be honest about those things. Or how is God helping you persevere through this? I was meeting with Linda here yesterday, and I was asking her, how's the Lord helping you persevere? How can we help you persevere? Perseverance through trial is significant. It says something about our faith. However, God is calling you to cultivate those kind of relationships. Let's continue praying and asking God to produce a quality to who we are as we hope in His love. Let's pray. Pray with me. Holy Spirit, please work in us a good. Pray that you would help us to see our lives the way you see them, to give us those filters of really becoming the kinds of people that have a virtue that's divine. We want you to make us successful. We don't want to have a fragile, incomplete idea of success, of what it means to be blessed. So please help us in this. Show us this from your word and give us the humility to submit to it. And do a good. Do a good through us that we can't fully quantify. Pray this for your sake. Amen.